They say to make it really big in the arts in this country, you need to live in either New York or LA. Well, personally, I don't think that's true at all. In 1969, an already established young illustrator said adios to the Big Apple and headed for the blue skies of Arlington, Texas. Since then, his work has been seen in many publications, including Playboy and Time magazine. Here at the campus of Texas Christian University, he teaches a weekly illustration class to aspiring young designers. Let's take a moment, see the work, and get to know the man and the illustrator, Don Ivan Punchatz. We're here in the drawing lab at TCU where Don teaches once a week in a figure drawing class. Don, when you moved in 1969 from the East Coast, what did you envision for your career? Where did you think your career would lead you in Texas?
I envisioned family, sociability, and comfort, because at that point I was living in Pittsburgh, away from both my own family and from my wife's family, and at that point we had two young children who needed to have some extended family around them besides my wife and I. And with the opportunity of moving to Texas and working on a freelance basis, I saw a great opportunity to move to an environment that I enjoyed, the Southwest, and then to be near a family group that my children could relate to.
Don, tell me, what Texas imagery has surfaced in your work now that you've been a Texan for over 20 years?
Imagery of the Texas look, I've certainly been influenced by a lot of the various demands by advertisers and editorial clients who, at periods when the Texas look was popular, like with Urban Cowboy, with the success of Dallas as a TV show, there was a great demand for images that had that Texas look. The painting of the cowboy in the Cadillac done for Levi Boots, I think, is sort of the culmination of that approach.
What pieces do you look back in your own portfolio now and say were pivotal for establishing you as an illustrator, and pieces that you liked?
Initially, all the work that brought me my first freelance illustration assignments, they were all paintings that I created for myself for exhibits in galleries in Pittsburgh and in other galleries where I was showing my work in San Antonio. And the work was really a product of a lot of personal interests and themes that I was exploring. At the time, I was working as an art director for an advertising agency, and all of my free time, other than the time I spent creating advertising, was spent creating these images for myself. And ultimately, I met an individual, Darwin Baum, who became my agent for my illustration work, who responded to the works as paintings first, and then literally found a market for the work as it existed. In a sense, a lot of the early work was sold as stock illustration, and then I had finished, completed paintings, and the rights to those paintings were purchased for use on paperbacks and other record albums.
Don, have you ever heard from any of the personalities that you painted portraits of?
Well, I did receive a reject letter from Pat Robertson for a Time magazine cover that I painted for Time when Pat was running for the primaries. He was not selected in the primaries, and consequently Time magazine didn't run the illustration, and I offered it to him as a portrait, but he said he'd rather see it on the cover of Time magazine than on his walls.
Tell me about the Michael Jackson piece.
The Michael Jackson piece was one of those pieces that was originally commissioned by National Lampoon. It was their celebrity issue, and the concept was theirs. The unfortunate incident of Michael Jackson's hair catching fire during a Pepsi commercial was picked up on by National Lampoon, a magazine that still has no holds-barred attitude towards humor, and they decided to show the Jackson 5 by showing Michael and by showing 4 marshmallows being roasted over his burning hair. Difficulties of doing that project was the fact that once I started looking for reference material on Michael Jackson, I couldn't find one image of him that represented the entire Michael Jackson look. He was changing physically so much through all the various operations he had that it was really hard to define Michael Jackson. It was probably the most difficult portrait I did. I believe I worked over 2 weeks on the drawing alone before I started painting.
Tell us a little bit about your technique.
My technique basically is based on acrylic, and I do use a rather unusual working surface. All of my paintings are done on Mylar drafting film, and working with a combination of airbrush, regular brushes, and any combination of materials related to creating certain textures and looks to the work. I'm open as far as the media I use, but basically that's the initial painting.
What changes in the years that you've been working as an artist have you seen in the areas of the economy and also in the area of computer graphics?
Without question, I think computer graphics is one of the newest tools for the creative visual individual. I see it as another tool in the same way that the brush or the camera or other media changes have influenced the look of artwork. The change from temperas to oil painting in the early Renaissance certainly created a whole different look to the imagery. Computer graphics is certainly an area that I feel is one that is going to contribute a great deal to a whole new view of our contemporary society.
Do you see computer graphics as a possible threat to the typical studio illustrator?
No, I don't think of it as a threat. In fact, I've been exploring areas of that particular medium and find it very challenging, and actually look forward to maybe extending a lot more of my capabilities into that area.
Do you feel like you're giving up anything of the purest approach to typical studio illustration?
No, I don't really have I think I have very Catholic, universal aesthetic appreciation, in that I have no particular affinities or predilections for any one look or style. It really comes down to what image communicates best the needs of the artist, and or if it's a commission piece for a client, what image creates the best communication for that client that you're working for.
Don, they say that those who can do, but those that can't teach. Obviously, that's not the situation here. Why do you teach? What do you find in yourself that makes teaching worthwhile for you personally?
I feel like it's a benefit to me to teach. I feel like I probably learned a great deal more from coming and interacting with students who are, in a sense, committing me to verbalize thoughts about the work that I'm doing that I might otherwise just simply internalize and not really even be aware of what I'm up to. and the constant challenge of trying to remain current, up to date, and also bring to those students a feeling for the excitement and the potential of the craft of illustration, in that it's a well, I don't know anything other than this is all I've ever wanted to do. As a child, I was very influenced by, of course, the Walt Disney cartoons and all the animated cartoons that were shown in theaters at the time. I had my other influences from the area of comics. So I've always been a person who's wanted to communicate in the mass media. I also like to communicate with myself. In recent years, I find a lot of the work that I've done has moved away from the very tight, precise work that my commercial assignments tend to work toward, and I find that I'm reverting back to a lot more of the spontaneous, direct, unrehearsed or unpredetermined concepts that I used to involve myself with when I was working for myself as a painter. And so there's a dichotomy of work that's being done, things that I do for myself that have no relation to the commercial market, and I have really not looked for a viable market for these as much as maintaining a steady schedule between work that's commissioned, where I'm doing work that's expected of me based on my portfolio, as opposed to the work that I do for myself in private. I find, for example, my figure drawing classes at TCU for the continuing education department are a real challenge because drawing is a very special part of the creative process for me. And for many years, the utilization of photography and external photographic references very often, in a sense, hindered my imagination to the extent that I had to work within a limited area of expression. The drawing and personal work that I'm doing now have nothing to do with any kind of attempt to utilize that for earning a living. It's to satisfy that personal need for that initial impetus to make pictures for yourself, and then ultimately that's been developed on into earning a living, creating pictures to satisfy other people. And for a while I didn't satisfy myself, but now I take the time to do that.
As a teacher here at TCU, Don, what do you tell students who are a bit idealistic about going into the arts, about the reality of art mixed with a practical business sense?
One of the things that I try to bring into my classes constantly are not only examples of aesthetic solutions to problems, but I bring up business and contractual problems that develop in working in the area of illustration. I feel that it's very important simply for the survival of the individual that they become very aware of what it takes to maintain the business side of their craft, simply because without that as a support, the finest talents in the world can find themselves in difficult financial straits. I'm not sure who quoted this. It's not an original quote, but I believe someone at one point mentioned that the whole history, or all of art history, is replete with bills from artists to their clients and replies from the clients, dissatisfied clients, to the artists of why they weren't going to pay their bills. So it's something that's existed throughout history, and unfortunately we've heard too many tales of that artist or individual who had a success and then through some sort of financial disruption ended up penniless, homeless, and died a pauper. And it's my goal to at least try to make my students aware of how important it is for them to develop their business sense as much as it is for them to develop and keep expanding their artistic horizons.
The largest citywide curbside recycling program in Texas is underway in Fort Worth. Fort Worth Recycles is a community-wide effort to reduce the waste stream, save natural resources, and extend the life of the city's landfill. Residents are saving newspaper, tin, aluminum, glass, and number 1 and 2 plastics for once-a-week pickups and transfer to the local processing facility. Fort Worth Recycles, people working together to preserve the future.
Don, why don't you take a few of the pieces that we've talked about and give us some information about the background of each one?
This piece was commissioned by Chris Schechner, a designer in Dallas who is the art director of Punchatz magazine, a magazine for children. Chris simply told me he wanted an image that showed children at a balloon festival. And usually when I need sort of this type of model, I won't go to a model agency, but in fact will talk to some of the neighbors. The girl and the boy here, the boy in particular has been in a number of illustrations I've done, and I just like to use non-professional models because a lot of times I feel they give me a more convincing, friendlier effect rather than a very stilted kind of kid who's been very keyed into being a professional model. And so the young girl here I saw in the mall with her parents and thought she'd be a wonderful model for this, and I simply approached them and gave them my card and told them what the project was, and they agreed to have their daughter in the painting. This piece was originally commissioned by a national science magazine, and the manuscript was simply sent down to me, and I was asked to come up with a concept that would show the fact that nicotine was an addictive substance. All the most recent research in that area had shown that it's probably more addictive than heroin. And taking the old cliche of the monkey on the back, I decided to, in a sense, transpose it into perhaps almost one of those flying monkeys from The Wizard of Oz that scared us so much as a kid, but by putting tobacco leaves on his wings and having the monkey providing an unlimited supply of tobacco for this individual who's hooked on it, seemed to be the most simplest and direct way to show that's an addictive substance. When this was commissioned by Levi Boots, the art director requested that we create this kind of heroic image of a cowboy at the end of the day sitting in his '59 Cadillac. I photographed the original Cadillac from a model they had at the Pate Travel Museum, but because of the angle of the car, I had to photograph it from the opposite side, so I had to recreate a lot of the dashboard behind the cowboy. The cowboy is also a creation made up out of a number of different model spaces. All of these things were requested by the agency producing this project. This was to be a combination of Robert Redford, Tom Cruise, Paul Newman, just a sort of panoply of everyone who's ever played a Western type. And so it's really an image that I kind of put together, the body for the cowboy I posed for. And in fact, if that body was real in relationship to the size of the car, the cowboy would have to be probably 9 or 10 feet tall to extend that. So that's one of the advantages of illustration over photography, in that you can create these kind of fictional images that still have an air of reality about them. The original commission for this was for a Time cover. Time magazine very often commissions several artists to paint several individuals if there's a question about who might appear on a cover. This was painted during the primary elections in 1988, and Pat Robertson was a contender. And the concept that I came up with this of kind of doing a stained glass window with the White House in the background was accepted by Time magazine, and I proceeded to complete the piece, but it never ran on the magazine simply because Pat Robertson did not complete the primaries. The photographic approach on this image is one that Time magazine has in the past asked me to produce, and my technique for achieving that is that by working on a transparent Mylar film, the reference photographs that they send could then be placed directly underneath the film, and I could begin my painting initially by simply tracing off all the major elements of the photograph. The balance of the work is done with airbrush and with brushwork, and of course this is all just created out of my own imagination, along with reference photographs on the White House. The treatment of the stained glass window, of course, set it up for some very bright colors. In this circumstance, the idea of using these bright colors with the sort of the new day behind the White House coming up really had to do with a lot of the political philosophy that Pat Robertson was expounding at the time. And just as a matter of fact, brighter, more upbeat kind of colors sell a magazine better than very dark, low-key kind of colors. This is the first of 2 years of Pepsi campaigns that I've done for the Halloween promotion. It's dealing basically using the Universal Studios monsters, Frankenstein, Dracula, the Wolfman, and carrying them through for the entire campaign on various promotional posters, in-store displays, and of course the 12-packs. This is a piece that I painted about 2 years ago in response to a great concern for a friend and former student who had begun, or I had heard that he had begun experimenting with some very, very hard drugs, and it was terribly disruptive and caused me a lot of emotional concern. And the response to that was this painting, which I refer to as the sting of the white scorpion. The painting was actually inspired by the emotional stress of being concerned about the individual, at the same time watching a PBS program on ancient Sumerian art, and one of the first anthropomorphized creatures that they showed as part of bas-reliefs in Assyrian temples was a picture of a scorpion man, and then it was just simply the recognition of the fact that with drug addicts that are injecting these highly toxic substances into their body. It's simply almost as if a scorpion would sting itself knowingly. And the piece was then purchased by the Medical Heritage Gallery and produced as a limited edition print.
Remember how good it felt the first time you gave 5? Well, now there's another way to give 5. Set a goal to give more. 5 hours a week and 5% of your income to the causes you care about. It'll make you feel like a winner every day of your life. So give more. Give 5. Call 1-800-55-GIVE-5.
What's left for Don Ivan Punchatz that he hasn't done yet?
I'm really looking to explore the children's book field. I believe that's an area that most illustrators at one point or other in their career have said, gee, I really want to do a children's book, and there are those who do and there are those who don't. I'm one of those who hasn't yet, but it's an area that I would like to explore, and I'm looking to perhaps contribute to that area of, or to that genre of illustration in whatever small way I can.
Any regrets moving to Texas?
Never. I think it's been probably one of the nicest places I could have chosen to live. It's certainly centrally located, fax machines and Federal Express, and its central location make it ideal for doing work nationally.
I want to thank Don for his time and his effort to give us some insight into a part of the art world that a lot of us don't know that much about. It looks to me like to make it in New York, you got to get out of New York. For Community Cable TV, this is Barry Phillips.
One of the prettiest views of downtown Fort Worth can be found just across the river at Oakwood Cemetery. Created in 1879 with the gift of 20 acres from city leader John Peter Smith, Oakwood today spreads out over 100 acres along the banks of the Trinity River. Many of the most prominent citizens of Fort Worth and Texas are buried amid the stately trees and impressive monuments. But some of the most interesting stories here are about the everyday folks who made the town run. One of the important jobs in early Fort Worth was bartending. It wasn't always easy, and it didn't pay very well. But a certain select few, 18 to be exact, would end up on Bartender's Row, a permanent monument to the workers who kept the machinery of the city well oiled. Buried not too much farther apart than they stood facing each other for a fatal shootout in February of 1887 are Luke Short and long-haired Jim Courtright. The two squared off outside the White Elephant Saloon at its original location on Main Street downtown. There are a few conflicting stories describing the gunfight, but the final result was the same. Jim Courtright, once acknowledged as an expert and quick shootist, lay dead in the street. Luke Short was acquitted of the killing, but a hard and fast life caught up with him a few years later when he died of dropsy at the age of 39. When you visit Oakwood, be sure and stop by the chapel. It was built in 1912 to host funeral services. Heavy vaults in the lower level were used by the cemetery to store bodies sent in from out of town, and a trap door in the chapel was used to lower caskets to a horse-drawn hearse waiting below. To find out more about Oakwood and the early history of Fort Worth, pick up a copy of Fort Worth and Tarrant County, a historical guide, published by the Tarrant County Historical Society. I'm Quentin McGowan.
Remember how good it felt the first time you gave 5? Well, now there's another way to give 5. Set a goal to give more. 5 hours a week and 5% of your income to the causes you care about. It'll make you feel like a winner every day of your life. So give more. Give 5. Call 1-800-55-GIVE-5.
You're watching CCT, Community Cable Television.